The dust cloud trailing behind the stagecoach was the only thing moving in the scorching New Mexico air. It rumbled to a halt outside the makeshift trading post of Redemption Springs, a town that hadn't yet lived up to its name. Nobody paid much attention to the battered leather trunk that tumbled from the roof, and nobody paid much attention to the slender figure that was roughly pushed out after it, collapsing into the dirt without so much as a whimper. But I saw it. I saw it all. My name is Nathan Harding, and I was just trying to mind my own business on the porch of the general store. I pulled the brim of my hat lower against the harsh afternoon sun, but you can't hide from everything. My hand, more from habit than anything else, moved to the revolver at my hip. The woman was crumpled on the ground, her once fine dress torn and soiled. The stagecoach driver just tossed her small carpet bag into the dust after her. Then, with a crack of his whip, he was gone, headed on toward Santa Fe, leaving a problem behind. Damn it all, I muttered. I strode across the dusty street. As I got closer, I could see her trying to rise, her arms trembling with the effort. There were purple bruises on her wrists, dark and ugly. A deep cut marred her lower lip. Her attempt to stand failed. She collapsed once more into the dirt. I knelt beside her, my shadow offering a little relief from the blistering sun. "Ma'am," I said, my voice gentle. She flinched away, her eyes wide with a fear so deep it was chilling. She tried to shield her face with shaking hands. "I ain't going to hurt you," I said, softening my voice. I didn't wait for a response. I carefully slid one arm beneath her knees and the other around her shoulders, lifting her like she weighed nothing. She was light, too light. The way she tensed at my touch told me more than words ever could about what she'd been through. Her breath caught in her throat as I cradled her against my chest. I looked down into eyes the color of a stormy sky, and I made a promise, more to myself than to her. "No one will hurt you again." My voice was low and certain as I carried her toward Doc Sullivan's office at the end of the street. But in a place like Redemption Springs, promises like that have a way of getting you killed. She said her name was Rebecca Porter. She had never felt more alone than in that moment, carried in the arms of a stranger, across a town she'd only just learned the name of. Her ribs ached with each breath, and the sunlight pierced her head like needles. "I can walk," she whispered. We both knew it was a lie. "Sure you can," I replied, not breaking my stride. "But humor me anyway." She told me a story, a simple story. She'd left Philadelphia with dreams of teaching school in Santa Fe. Her fiancé, a man named Charles, had come with her, promising adventure and protection. But 2 days into their journey, she discovered the real Charles. His charm had dissolved into drunken rage when she'd questioned him, gambling away their travel funds. The beating that followed had been the first of many. "Almost there," I said, nodding toward a small building with a hand-painted sign, "J. Sullivan, M.D." I shouldered open the door without putting her down. "Good Lord, Nate," a gruff voice came from within. "What have you brought me now?" "Found her outside the trading post," I said. "Stagecoach just dumped her there." I lowered Rebecca onto a clean but worn examination table. The room smelled of carbolic acid and whiskey. Doc Sullivan was an older man with kind eyes and steady hands that made you forget his fondness for the bottle. "I'm fine," Rebecca protested weakly. "I just need to rest." "She needs looking after, Doc," I said, stepping back but not leaving. "I'll cover whatever it costs." "I can pay my own way," Rebecca insisted. I saw her little reticule. There was barely enough in there for a night's lodging. Charles, she said, had taken everything else before abandoning her. The doctor's examination was thorough and gentle. 3 broken ribs, extensive bruising, mild concussion and dehydration, he concluded. "Who did this to you, miss?" Rebecca looked away. "It doesn't matter now. It matters to me, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as hard as steel. She studied me then, really studied me for the first time. I'm a tall man, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of coffee. My clothes are worn but clean. I carry myself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and harder decisions. My former fiancé, she admitted finally. He's long gone now, headed to California with what was left of my money. My expression darkened. Got a name? Nate, the doctor warned. Let the law handle it. What law? I scoffed. Marshall hasn't been through in 2 months. Please, Rebecca said, her voice small. I just want to forget him. The doctor finished binding her ribs and mixing a powder for pain. She needs rest. Can't stay here, though. My wife's sister is arriving tomorrow, taking my spare room. The boarding house is full with those railroad surveyors, I said, thinking out loud. She can stay at my place. I've got a spare room. Rebecca stiffened. That's very kind, but I'll be in the bunkhouse with my ranch hands, I added quickly. The house will be all yours until you're back on your feet. I couldn't impose. You could try the saloon, the doctor suggested dryly. I'm sure those rooms are available by the hour. I shot him a withering look. Not helping, Doc. Rebecca closed her eyes, exhaustion overwhelming her pride. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Thank you, she whispered. Just until I can find work. Nathan owns the largest cattle spread this side of the territory, the doctor said, a little too cheerfully. Half the town works for him already. Sullivan, I warned again. The doctor just smiled. Just providing context for the lady. An hour later, Rebecca was in my wagon, propped on pillows the doctor's wife had sent along. Her trunk and carpet bag were secured in the back. The pain powder had dulled the worst of her agony, but I kept the horses at a gentle walk. Not much further, I assured her. The Double H ranch is just beyond that ridge. As we crested the hill, she gasped. Sprawled before us was a vista that could take your breath away. A large, well-built ranch house stood proudly amid outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. In the distance, cattle grazed on green pastures, fed by a winding stream. Mountains rose majestically in the background, their peaks still capped with snow. It's beautiful, she said. My expression softened with pride. Built most of it myself. Started with nothing but a claim and 20 head of cattle 8 years ago. You've accomplished a great deal, she said, and it sounded sincere. Had my share of setbacks, I replied, guiding the wagon toward the main house. Range war nearly wiped me out in 72. Drought almost finished what the rustlers started in 74. Yet you persevered. I glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching my lips. Ain't much choice out here but to keep going. The house was larger than it looked from a distance, with a wide veranda wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, she was surprised by the comfortable furnishings. Curtains on the windows, books on shelves, and a piano in the corner. My mother's, I explained, following her gaze to the instrument. Never could bring myself to part with it after she passed. Do you play? She asked. About as well as a bear with mittens, I admitted. You? I taught music in Philadelphia, she said, her voice distant, before deciding to come west. I led her to a bedroom at the back of the house. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a dresser, and a small desk beneath a window that overlooked a kitchen garden. It's not fancy, I said, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. But it's quiet. It's perfect, she assured me. I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks. Rest up. My housekeeper, Mrs. Fenton, comes by 3 times a week. She'll be here tomorrow to help with whatever you need. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Rebecca listened to the sounds of the ranch. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. But safety in the West is a fragile thing, and sometimes the thing you're running from isn't half as dangerous as the person you're running to. The next morning brought Mrs. Fenton, a no-nonsense widow in her 50s, who arrived with fresh bread and a mission to fatten Rebecca up. "Too thin by half," she declared, setting a tray of food beside Rebecca's bed. "Mr. Harding says you're to eat everything I bring you." "Mr. Harding seems to have strong opinions about my welfare," Rebecca observed. Mrs. Fenton's expression softened. "He's a good man. Lost his wife and baby to childbed fever 5 years back. Threw himself into building this ranch afterward." Rebecca felt a pang of sympathy. "I had no idea." "He doesn't talk about it," Mrs. Fenton said. "But it changed him, made him more mindful of those who need help." Over the next week, Rebecca's strength began to return. She ventured from her room to the veranda, watching the life of the ranch. I would tip my hat to her each morning as I rode out, and again each evening upon my return. Our conversations were brief, but they were becoming more comfortable. On the 8th day, she made her way to the piano. Her ribs still ached, but the desire to feel music beneath her fingers was overwhelming. She played a Chopin nocturne that had always soothed her. I was so absorbed in the music, I didn't notice her standing in the doorway, hat in hand, listening with an expression of wonder. "That's the most beautiful thing I've heard since coming west," I said when she finished. She startled, then smiled. "Music was my refuge growing up," she said. "My father was strict. The piano was the one place I could express myself." "My mother used to play hymns on Sundays," I said, moving into the room. "The house hasn't heard music since she died." She played for nearly an hour. When she finally stopped, her fingers tired but her spirit lighter, she found me watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You should be the school teacher here," I said abruptly. "What?" "Redemption Springs needs a teacher," I said. "Town's growing, families settling, railroads coming. The children need schooling." "I came west to teach in Santa Fe," she said, confused. "Santa Fe's got plenty of teachers. We've got none." I leaned forward. "The town council's been looking to hire someone for months. The schoolhouse is built, just sitting empty. I'd need somewhere to live." "The town has a small house for the teacher," I said. "Nothing fancy, but it's yours with the position." I hesitated. "Or you could stay here." "That wouldn't be proper," she interrupted, a blush rising on her cheeks. I looked away. "No, I suppose not." The next day, I drove her into town to meet the council. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room structure, and the teacherage next door was snug but tidy. The council, the general store owner, the saloon proprietor, and Doc Sullivan hired her on the spot. School would begin in 3 weeks. "I'll have your things brought from the ranch tomorrow," I said as we left the meeting. "Thank you for everything you've done," she said, but her voice had an unexpected note of sadness. I just nodded, my own expression unreadable. The next few days were a flurry of activity for Rebecca. Children appeared at her door, bearing gifts from their parents. I came by only once, to deliver her trunk and carpet bag. I declined her invitation for tea, citing work at the ranch. The brief encounter left her feeling strangely bereft. She was finally getting the new start she wanted. So why did it feel like an ending? 2 days before school was to begin, Rebecca was arranging books on the shelves when the door burst open. A man stumbled in, unshaven and reeking of whiskey. It took her a moment to recognize him. It was Charles. "There you are," he slurred, advancing on her. "Thought you could hide from me." "How did you find me?" Rebecca asked, backing away, her heart pounding. "Stagecoach driver remembered dropping a pretty lady in this miserable excuse for a town." He grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully. "You're coming with me. Still need a respectable wife for my business ventures. Let go of me, she demanded, struggling. He backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling against the desks. Still haven't learned your place, I see. She tasted blood. As she tried to crawl away, he caught her ankle. No one refuses Charles Winters, he snarled. The schoolhouse door crashed open again. Charles was suddenly lifted off his feet. It was me. I was holding him by the throat, my face a mask of cold fury. You touch her again, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. You're a dead man. He struggled in my grip. This is none of your concern. She's my fiancée. Former fiancé, Rebecca corrected, rising shakily. And the man who beat me half to death before robbing me and abandoning me. My grip tightened. Is that true? Charles clawed at my hands. She's lying. Hysterical woman, always making up stories. I looked at Rebecca. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing the fading but still ugly bruises that circled her wrists. He did this, she said quietly. And worse. Without another word, I dragged Charles outside and threw him into the street. You've got 1 hour to be gone from this town, I said. If I see you again, I won't be so generous. He scrambled to his feet, his face ugly with rage. You'll regret this, both of you. He reached for the gun at his hip, but my draw was faster. The shot rang out before he could clear leather. Charles crumpled, clutching a shattered shoulder. Doc Sullivan came running. Man drew on me, I said simply. I suggest you patch him up and put him on the next stage out of here. The doctor nodded, and I turned back to Rebecca. Are you hurt? I asked. Just shaken, she said, though her cheek throbbed. I gently tilted her face to examine the mark. My touch was careful, my eyes troubled. I should have killed him. No, she said firmly. You're not a killer. I've killed before, I admitted. During the war. Afterward, protecting what's mine. This is different, isn't it? She asked softly. I looked at her, at the strength shining through her fear. The thought of him hurting you, I said, my voice low, makes me want to drag him back and finish the job. She placed her hand on mine. Thank you for stopping him, for keeping your promise. I looked confused. What promise? The day we met, she said. You told me no one would hurt me again. Something shifted in my expression then, a flicker of vulnerability behind the strength. I meant it, I said. I still do. But as I looked into her stormy eyes, I suddenly wondered if I was the one who was in real danger. That evening, Rebecca sat on the porch of her teacherage, watching the sunset. Charles would be gone by morning, sent away with a bandaged shoulder and a warning never to return. She heard hoofbeats and looked up to see me dismounting in front of her house. Came to check on you, I said, removing my hat. Doc said Charles left on the afternoon stage. He won't be bothering you again. Thank you, she said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. I hesitated, then sat. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky. I've been thinking, I said finally, about what you said, about propriety. I wasn't a man who spoke flowery words, but I had to try. I haven't been able to get you out of my mind since the day I found you. The way you play that piano, the way you face each day with courage, despite what was done to you. I paused. I know it's too soon. You've been through hell, but I'd like permission to call on you, properly, to court you if you're willing. Her heart hammered in her chest. Nathan, You don't have to answer now, I said quickly. Just think about it. I'm a patient man. She reached out, touching my hand. Ask me again in a month, she said, after I've had time to stand on my own 2 feet. I nodded, understanding in my eyes. A month it is. The school term began with 15 eager students. Rebecca threw herself into her work, finding a joy in teaching that she hadn't felt in years. True to my word, I kept my distance. For exactly 1 month, I appeared at her door on a Sunday afternoon, freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt, and holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "It's been a month," I said simply. She smiled and invited me in for tea. Over the following weeks, our courtship progressed with a sweetness that healed old wounds. I taught her to ride. She read Shakespeare to me on her porch as the autumn evenings grew cooler. The town watched with approval. As winter approached, I invited her to Sunday dinner at the ranch. After dinner, I led her to the piano. "Would you play something?" I asked. "The house has missed your music." She played a gentle melody she'd composed herself. When she finished, she turned to find me kneeling beside the piano bench. "I've rehearsed a dozen speeches," I said, "and forgotten every one. All I know is that I love you, Rebecca Porter. My life was empty before you came into it, and I don't want to live another day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "with all my heart, yes." We were married on Christmas Eve in the town's small church. Her students sang carols as she walked down the aisle. Afterward, we returned to the Double H, our home. Snow had begun to fall, transforming the landscape into a glistening wonderland. I carried her across the threshold, just as I had carried her, broken and afraid, to the doctor's office. "No one will hurt you again," I repeated my promise, setting her gently on her feet. "Not while I draw breath." She reached up to touch my face. "I know, and you should know that your heart is safe with me as well." But as she spoke those words, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. A shadow so quick I almost missed it. What was she hiding? What secret did she still carry that kept her from fully trusting the new life we were about to build? The West is a hard place for secrets, and sooner or later they always find their way into the light. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves in the pastures, wildflowers on the hillsides, and the news that Rebecca was expecting our first child. My joy was tempered with fear. I remembered my first wife's fate all too well. But Rebecca's quiet confidence eased my worries. She continued teaching until the end of the school term, then focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. I built a cradle from pine, polishing it until it gleamed. She sewed tiny garments in the evenings as we sat together by the fire. On a warm September night, as a harvest moon hung golden over the ranch, our daughter was born. We named her Emma, after my mother. As I held her for the first time, my eyes met Rebecca's over the tiny bundle. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "For what?" she asked, exhausted but radiant. "For surviving," I said, "for being strong enough to trust again, for giving me a second chance at happiness." She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "We gave each other that chance," she said. But her eyes told a different story. The shadow was still there. 5 years passed. The ranch prospered. The town grew with the arrival of the railroad. Emma was joined by a brother, James. Rebecca continued to teach, persuading the town council to build a larger school. On the anniversary of our first meeting, I surprised her. Our daughter, Emma, who had inherited her mother's musical talent, gave a piano recital. As she played, I slipped my arm around my wife's waist. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if that stagecoach had kept going?" I asked quietly. She leaned into my embrace. "I try not to dwell on what might have been," she said, "but I thank God every day for sending me to Redemption Springs." "And I thank him for giving me the courage to lift you up that day," I replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. But later that night, a rider came from town. A telegraph for me. It was from the U.S. Marshal in Santa Fe. It read, "Nathan Harding. We have reason to believe the outlaw Charles Winters has returned to the territory. He was last seen asking about a woman matching your wife's description. A warrant has been issued for his arrest in connection with the robbery and murder of a land surveyor outside Philadelphia 2 months before he came west. Proceed with caution." My blood ran cold. I looked at the date on the telegram. Land surveyor. Philadelphia. 2 months before he came west. I remembered what Rebecca had told me the day we met, that she had taught music in Philadelphia before deciding to come west. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The timing was too perfect. The dead land surveyor, the money Charles had gambled away, the business ventures he needed a respectable wife for. I walked back into the house, the telegram crumpled in my fist. Rebecca was at the piano playing a soft lullaby. She looked up and smiled, but the smile died when she saw my face. "What is it, Nathan?" I held out the telegram. She read it, and all the color drained from her face. "A land surveyor," I said, my voice flat. "In Philadelphia. Murdered. Right before you decided to come west." The beautiful life we had built, the peace we had found, it all felt like a lie. "Who are you, Rebecca?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did you really run away from?" The truth, I suspected, was far darker than an abusive fiancé, and it had just followed her to our door. Rebecca stared at the telegram, her face a mask of stone. The carefully constructed piece of our life was gone, replaced by the ghosts of a past she had never shared. "It wasn't me," she whispered, her eyes wide with a familiar fear I hadn't seen in years. "I didn't kill him." "Then who did?" I demanded, my voice harder than I intended. The man I had chased out of town 5 years ago wasn't just an abusive drunk. He was a killer, and my wife, the mother of my children, was connected to him, to his crime. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "My father," she said, the words barely audible. "He was a land surveyor in Philadelphia. He and Charles were partners." The room tilted. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Charles was cheating him," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "Forging deeds, selling land that didn't belong to them. My father found out. He confronted Charles. They argued. I heard a gunshot." She looked up at me, her stormy eyes pleading for me to believe her. "I ran into the study. My father was on the floor. Charles was standing over him, a pistol in his hand. He told me it was an accident, that the gun went off during the struggle. But then he took the money from the safe, all of it. And he told me I was coming with him." "Why?" I asked, the single word hanging in the air between us. "Why you?" "Because I was a witness," she choked out, "and because my signature was on some of the forged deeds. Charles had convinced me they were legitimate partnership documents. He said if he went down for my father's murder, he would make sure I went down for fraud. He said he would tell them I was his accomplice, that I helped him kill my own father for the inheritance. The trap had been perfect. She had been caught between a murderer and the gallows. Her escape west hadn't been a new beginning. It had been a desperate flight for her life. The abuse, the abandonment. It had all been a way to control her, to break her, to ensure she would never talk. The weight of her secret, the burden she had carried alone for all these years, finally broke her. She collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with sobs that had been held back for half a decade. I held her tight, my own anger melting away, replaced by a fierce protective rage. The promise I had made to her that first day echoed in my mind. No one will hurt you again. Charles Winters had broken that promise, and now he was coming back to finish the job. We knew he wouldn't come alone, and he wouldn't come through the front door. We spent the next 2 days turning the Double H into a fortress. I sent Mrs. Fenton into town with the children, with a story about a sick cousin in Santa Fe. The house felt empty without them, the silence a heavy, ominous thing. We worked side by side, a silent, grim understanding between us. We cleaned and loaded every rifle, every pistol on the ranch. We barricaded the windows, leaving only small slits to shoot through. We stocked the house with water and ammunition. We were preparing for a siege. On the third night, under a sliver of a moon, they came. 4 riders, moving like shadows across the open pasture. They didn't ride straight for the house. They were smart, circling, testing our defenses. "He's here," Rebecca said from her position at the back window. Her voice was steady. The frightened woman I had found in the dust was gone. In her place was a survivor, a fighter. A voice called out from the darkness. "Rebecca, my dear, I've come for you." It was Charles. His voice was no longer slurred with whiskey, but sharp and cold. "I have a new business opportunity, a big one, but I need my respectable wife by my side, and I need the original deed you took from your father's safe." The deed. That was it. The one piece of evidence that could unravel his entire web of lies. "Send out the deed and my wife," he called, "and the rancher lives. Refuse, and I'll burn this place to the ground, with both of you inside." "He'll kill us anyway," I said, my eye pressed to the sight of my Winchester. "I know," Rebecca replied, her own rifle steady in her hands. The night exploded. They came from all sides, their guns spitting fire in the darkness. We returned fire, the roar of our rifles deafening in the enclosed space. A bullet splintered the window frame next to my head, showering me with glass. Rebecca fired back, a calm, methodical rhythm. Pop, reload. Pop. One of the riders screamed and fell from his horse. 3 left. They retreated, melting back into the darkness. But we knew it was just the beginning. They would wait. They would try to starve us out. Or burn us out. "There's dynamite in the old mine shaft," I said, my mind racing. "Left over from when I was blasting the well." "It's risky," Rebecca said. "Everything about this is risky," I countered. The plan was desperate. I would slip out the back, circle around through the creek bed, and make my way to the mine. She would provide covering fire, a distraction to keep them pinned down. "Be careful," she said, her hand on my arm. I looked at her, at the woman who had become my whole world. "Always am," I said. I moved through the darkness, a ghost in my own backyard. The creek was cold, the water seeping into my boots, but it covered my sound. I could hear them shouting to each other, their voices sharp with frustration. I was almost to the mine when I saw him. Charles. He was standing on the ridge above, silhouetted against the stars, watching the house. I raised my rifle. He was an easy shot. Too easy. It was a trap. A shot rang out from the rocks to my left. The bullet ripped through my shoulder, spinning me around. I hit the ground hard, my rifle clattering on the stones. Before I could recover, 2 of his men were on me. The fight was short and brutal. In the end, they dragged me, bleeding and half-conscious, and threw me at Charles's feet. "Well, well," he said, a cruel smile on his face. "Look what we have here. The hero." He kicked me in my wounded shoulder, and the world went gray with pain. "Now," he said, turning his cold eyes toward the house, "let's see if your wife is willing to trade." He dragged me into the open, a human shield. "Rebecca," he yelled, "I have your husband. Send out the deed, or he dies right here." The silence from the house was a physical thing. I knew what she was thinking. I knew the choice she was facing. "Don't do it, Rebecca," I yelled, my voice a raw rasp. "Don't give him what he wants." Charles laughed and pressed the muzzle of his pistol to my head. "The clock is ticking, my love." Then, the front door of the house creaked open. Rebecca stepped out onto the porch. She was holding the deed in one hand, but in her other hand, hidden in the folds of her skirt, was a derringer. "Let him go, Charles," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "The deed first," he said, his eyes glittering with greed. She walked slowly down the steps, holding the paper out in front of her. As she got closer, I saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was pure, cold fury. She was closer now, just a few feet away. "Here," she said, offering the deed. As Charles reached for it, her other hand came up. The derringer spat fire. The shot was a small, sharp crack in the night. Charles staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face, his hand clutching his chest. He looked down at the spreading red stain, then back at Rebecca. "You," he gasped, and then he fell. The other two men, stunned, raised their rifles. But before they could fire, two more shots rang out. One from Rebecca's derringer, the other from my own revolver, which I had managed to pull from my holster as Charles fell. The two men dropped, and then silence. I lay on the ground, the world spinning, the pain in my shoulder a roaring fire. Rebecca was at my side in an instant, her hands gentle as she examined the wound. "You're not a killer," I whispered, the words tasting like blood and irony. "I am when I have to be," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "When someone threatens my family." And in that moment, I knew. The ghosts of my past were finally gone. My first wife, my first child. They would always be a part of me. But they were memories. Rebecca, and Emma, and James. They were my future. A future we had just bought with gunpowder and blood. The sun rose on a new world. The trial in Santa Fe was a formality. The deed, along with the testimony of a dying outlaw who had nothing left to lose, was enough to expose Charles Winters's entire criminal enterprise. His name, once feared, became a curse. We rebuilt. The bullet hole in my shoulder healed, leaving another scar in my collection. Rebecca's wounds, the ones you couldn't see, began to heal too. The shadows in her eyes were replaced by a quiet, steady light. Redemption. Springs finally started to live up to its name. The railroad brought new families, new life. The schoolhouse filled with the sound of children's laughter. Our ranch, the Double H, became a place of new beginnings, not just for us, but for others who came west looking for a second chance. We grew old together. We watched our children grow and have children of their own. We filled the house with music and books and love. Sometimes on a quiet evening, we'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset. And I would remember that scorching day, the cloud of dust, the broken woman in the street. I went looking for a fight that day, but I found a future instead. What did you think of Nathan and Rebecca's story? Do you believe in second chances, even when they're born from tragedy? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of a love as wild and unforgiving as the West itself, don't forget to like and subscribe. You never know what story is waiting just over the next ridge.